Today, after many months of request, I will finally tell you the full story of Uru. Prepare, because this is going to be a roller coaster of emotions. We will start from the beginning to the very final day. Who are her parents? How did she meet Ahadi? And how did she deal with Scar? But before we continue, I'd want to give a big shout out to Sam, Flop and VGK for winning the drawing competition of Tanglemane. You too can join, the link is in the description. Are you ready for this adventure? This is the full story of Uru. It all started from Choyo. Do you remember? He was the so-called selfish lion, also known as the adopted and not blood-related brother of Mohatu, one of the most important kings ever to rule in the Pridelands. The heir of the throne was Ahadi. He was just a cub, but was grown enough to understand that he was going to be the next king. During this period, Choyo always suffered from his own envy and bad attitude towards the pride. But this was until he met Amani, an outlandish lioness that was passing by from another pride. She had some of the outlander's genes in appearance, but was very kind and compassionate. Something about all this made her and Choyo fall in love with each other. Choyo and Amani finally had a daughter. Uru was the name they gave her. Since the first day that she started walking, she proved to be an adventurous soul, constantly exploring and sometimes getting in danger. Due to this conduct, her parents were forced to constantly look on her. Uru, despite of her thirst of discovering new things, she was really never interested in knowing anyone in the pride. She seemed very introvert in that sense. Ahadi had always been interested in being friends with her, as he was often bored and couldn't find anyone to play with. But Uru, she seemed to be happier alone than with company. One morning, Uru managed to go unnoticed from her parents and sneak out to a completely new zone of the Pridelands that she had just discovered but wasn't allowed to go to. This place was the Gorge. She had never seen this place from this close, and being such a little small cub, she felt all the imposing sensation that this massive gorge transmitted. But this wasn't enough for her. She wanted to see what the bottom was hiding from her view. In the meanwhile, it had been hours since Uru hadn't been seen by anyone in the pride. Choyo and Amani were searching for her, as it were Mohatu and Ahadi. It was late evening and still no trace of Uru. Ahadi was very concerned for her and decided to disobey and go far away to search her. He had this feeling, probably a presentiment that only young lions can understand. He reached the gorge and was sure that this was the place. Being such a huge site, it was going to be very difficult for him to check on each edge, each rock and each hiding spot to find her. But suddenly, a very high-pitched scream and some rocks falling down could be heard from one side of the terrain crack, not too far away. He ran as quick as he could before the worst could happen. Uru screamed again. She was stuck at the top of a rock on the wall of the gorge, and she was too small to jump up. Ahadi slipped down the wall, reached the rock, and quickly grabbed her with his mouth. If it wasn't for him, she would not have returned home that night. After this experience, Uru realized that Ahadi was not too bad of a lion after all, and she slowly became friend of him. More and more during time, playing, exploring, and experiencing new things. As the years were passing by, they became inseparable and one day they fell in love. After Mohatu passed away, Ahadi and Uru became king and queen of the Pridelands. It was not long until they had their first son, Mufasa. Both Ahadi and Uru were very proud of him since the very first day. He was very similar to his father, both in appearance and personality. They knew from the beginning that he had everything to be a good king. Few years later, one day, a big problem surged. The Pridelands were running out of water. It was not an uncommon thing as it happened periodically every summer, but this time was different. It was early spring. How are the animals going to survive 6 months of intense hot weather without water? It was going to be a disaster. They gave it some time to see if it was just a temporary problem. But 2 months had passed and things got out of hand. The whole Pride was devastated and the summer season had just started. At this point, there was nobody that could realistically help. Choyo was very old and weak. Amani had passed away some months before. The animals were weak and dehydrated, and Ahadi had to constantly be present helping the inhabitants in need and keep the order. The only one that could save the Pride was Uru, and her adventurous nature would certainly be of use. She insisted and went on this quest. She had to discover the root of the problem and solve it, and was totally willing to do it. Wow, probably one of the best queens ever to exist. She left the Pride and followed the main river for hours, days, weeks. Food and refuge were not a problem, as she found both on her way to the source. The main and most significant problem was something that she didn't tell anyone before leaving. She was pregnant. If she had mentioned it, Ahadi would have not let her go away. She knew it was all or nothing. In the meanwhile, several weeks had passed and a significant amount of lives in the Pridelands were at risk. Few had already died, and now also food was missing. Everyone counted on Uru, but the common fear that something had happened to her was pretty obvious. Finally, Uru reached the source. The problem was that a bunch of trees, trunks, and dirt, probably pushed there by a huge thunderstorm, were positioned right in the middle of the stream, blocking the passage of water and creating a sort of natural dam. She couldn't do it alone. She was going to need the help of several animals to clear all that waste. Fortunately, after exploring the zone for a while, Uru found a friendly Pride that was willing to help her. It took 3 days, working day and night, to remove all the waste. Eventually, the water started running again. Uru thanked everyone and quickly ran back towards the Pridelands. From there, a distant sound could be heard at one point. Everyone quickly got up to look at what was happening. The water was finally coming back to fill every lake and river. Everyone shouted of joy and the land flourished after very few days. The thirst ended and there was more water now than any other summer. Uru had succeeded, but it was still some days later until she showed up. Ahadi was happier than ever and promised Uru that he will never separate from her ever again. Uru was now at her final months of pregnancy. The whole Pride was patiently waiting for the birth of hers and Ahadi's new cub. The time came and Uru gave birth to her second son. He was very similar to his mother. Green eyes, dark brown fur, and kind of an outlandish look. He was a very needy cub, sometimes a bit capricious, and because of this, on the day of the ceremony, he was given the name Taka, which, as opposed to what many people think, it means want. Since his first weeks of life, he showed a great desire to draw attention to himself, but this attitude worsened as time went on because of Ahadi and Mufasa spending nearly no time with him. Ahadi's goal from now on was to raise Mufasa to be the best king possible and teach him his values. But Taka, he was completely left alone. If it was not for his mother, Uru, things would have gone differently, and in a worse way. But instead, she was always there for him, trying to give him all the attention he needed and raise him as best as she could, all by herself. Unfortunately, Taka developed bad emotions towards his father and his big brother. He started to become envious for not being the heir of the throne. Despite of Uru trying to teach him humility, something inside him took over that teaching. He wanted to feel important. He wanted a throne. This led him to start associating with the hyenas. It was something very serious, as the hyenas were the main enemy of the Pridelands. And once he got caught, he was severely punished by Ahadi. But fortunately, the situation didn't escalate. During his adolescence, Taka spent most of his time outside the Pridelands. Uru was very concerned for him, as he essentially never showed up. One day, after many weeks without seeing him, he was found inside the Pride Rock by his father. He had brought some hyenas, and had immediately tried to speak to him asking for explanations. He looked very angry and disappointed. Taka didn't want to speak, but at the moment he had, anger and frustration kicked over Ahadi, and he lashed his paw, nailing his claw on Taka's face. He had injured him, leaving his face with a permanent scar. For life. The hyenas immediately ran away, and Uru showed up just right after that, and got mad at Ahadi for what he did. But the damage was already done. Taka left the Pride Rock and ran away. Since then, he gave himself the name Scar to never forget the action of his father. From then on, things changed. Forever. Scar never met his father again, and Mufasa was now an enemy for him. He showed anger, but deep inside him he felt alone, and truly wanted someone that could help him. Lucky was he that his mother still loved him. Uru was Scar's only support for the rest of his life. The only moments that he felt consoled and glad were the ones that he spent with his mother. He passed through a very harsh time, and she knew it. Scar, willing to do anything for his mother, he stopped frequenting the hyenas and spent most of his time with her. Uru was very glad for this, but she was also very old now. Scar, knowing that her time had to come sooner or later, he spent every day with her for the last years. For him, she was all, a mother, a friend, and the father he never had. One night, Uru, in her last days, she asked Scar to keep a promise. She didn't ask him to accept his father and brother in his life, but at least to forgive them. The next morning, Scar woke up, but Uru, she did not. The night Uru had passed away in her sleep, with the heart and hope that Scar, in the years to come and for the rest of his life, would never forget his promise. The story of Uru is such an important phase in the whole lore of The Lion King. Tonight, we dove into the 3 most important stages of her life and got a sneak peek of Scar's story. I hope you liked this video. If so, leave a like. And if you have any theory about Uru, Scar or any of this, definitely leave it in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out the artists. Their name will be in the description. I'm Ascari, and I wish you a good night.